Welcome everyone. Welcome this afternoon to our session today for the Turian's Clinical AI group. I'm Alicia Davis. I'm one of the chairs, along with Nick, whose face has popped up, and Joe and Emma as well too. And we're absolutely delighted to have you all with us on this spring Tuesday. Finally, it's getting a bit warmer. Just to let you know, we'll be recording the session, and if you wouldn't mind to stay on mute while others are speaking, that really helps just with background noise sometimes. We'll come to introduce our speakers shortly. We have a fantastic topic today, that no opportunity without a strategy, the government's AI Opportunities Action Plan and what it could or maybe should mean for the NHS. So I'm delighted to have Malte Gerhold here with us from the Health Foundation, Director of Innovation and Improvement, and also Nell Thornton as well too, one of the Improvement Fellows at the Health Foundation. So before we hand over to them, we also have the opportunity for a kind of a quick 3-minute intro from a couple of members of the community where you can talk about, introduce yourself and your areas of interest and maybe what you would like to know from the community members as well too. And I think Nick was going to do the introductions.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, this is an opportunity for us as a community to get to know each other. So strictly 3 minutes. And first up, we've got Ajab Baridi. Are you here?
Ayub.
I think I've seen you.
Yes, Ayub.
Ayub.
That's me.
Thank you so much, Ayub. The floor is yours.
Yep, I'll just run through maybe a few points I wanted to introduce myself on, if that's okay.
Please
so
do.
my name is Ayub. I was born in the Netherlands, lived in New Jersey, US, and Sweden. I did biomedical research as a background and did a PhD in cancer stem cell research here in the UK at the Clinical School of Medicine at the UK Institute in Cambridge. I previously had a few biomedical startups and tech bio ones. Helix is one of them in Cambridge. I'm not involved in that more in that. And then was a senior executive medical and clinical affairs lead in pharma. And then I had a few startups that I'm currently working on. One of them is an AI health tech, which I want to bring your attention to. But I'm also co-founding a Africa Health Innovation Center with a group of professionals here in London. If you're ever interested in that, we want to empower deep science, deep tech in Africa with a UK angle to collaborate with Centers of Excellence in the UK and Centers of Excellence in Africa to address needs in Africa and MENA. I'm also a co-founder of a deep science and deep tech innovation center here in the network here in the UK that's focused and run by PhDs, postdocs, and medics, focused on deep science, life sciences. We have around 15 branches around the world, and these are some of the locations. It's all run by PhDs, postdocs, and clinicians. And the aim is to spin out startups. And you can see there's a number of startups that we had that came through the program, and they're all in the health tech and biotech space. And finally, I'm a co-founder of a AI health tech startup that's aimed to improve healthcare through meta-analysis. As you may know, meta-analysis is being used in clinical development, clinical guidelines, drug discovery, drug development. It's probably one of the most boring things we in research deal with. It's very time consuming. So if you develop clinical guidelines, health technology assessment with nice reimbursements, or just doing research in clinical trials, it's a very cumbersome piece of work. It sometimes takes 6 months, 12 months to look at the right patient cohorts, the inclusion/exclusion criteria, if you look at a specific therapy versus another therapy. So what we're developing with my co-founder, who's also did his PhD at the same institute in Cambridge, he's a machine learning expert and I'm a biomedic. And what we're trying to do is to automate it through open source large language models and to interrogate clinical data that is available for clinical guidelines, real world evidence data, patient case studies, health technology assessments. And then you put in your data into the platform, which we're currently building. So we're developing a minimal viable product, really early stage. And then we're going to extract and parse the information, use statistical analysis on that to provide a meta-analysis for the specific question. And my ask for the Alan Turing Clinical Interest Group is we are seeking collaborators to develop an AI-enabled meta-analysis benchmark paper. So we're currently looking at a few clinicians and researchers in UCL, Imperial King's College, to develop this benchmarking manual versus AI-driven metrics evaluation extraction study to compare manual versus AI-enabled for clinical guidelines, trial development, and health technology assessments. These are my details. Please check me out. Link me on LinkedIn. This is my email address, and I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ayub. A fascinating and diverse kind of selection of things to get involved in there. And thank you so much for sharing that with us. And that was brilliant as well, because that was 3 minutes. So we're going to quickly move on to Malika. Is Malika on the call?
Yes, hello.
Brilliant. Malika, lovely to meet you. We look forward to hearing all about what you're up to.
So I don't have any slides, but I'm a child and adolescent. I was a child and adolescent therapist in the NHS, and for 10 years I've been in the digital therapeutic space. So that means software as treatment is basically what I look at. And I've developed products, adapting them to different therapeutic areas, genders, cultures, neurodivergencies. I've done a lot of regulatory work in the US, in Europe, in the UK, and a lot more in kind of the Middle East and Asia as well, and running clinical trials for these digital therapeutics solution. And right now I'm more focused on the commercial aspect. So as part of my background, I've worked with products across therapeutic areas, including AI therapy bots that were cleared by regulators in different areas. And I now have my own consultancy called Last Mile Digital Health, where I help companies with their business model and their go-to-market strategy. Basically, what we see in the field is that there are a lot of great products out there, and now the technology is very exciting, so we can do a lot in terms of helping patients. But a lot of the time what happens is that the technology doesn't get into the hands of users. And a lot of companies think that the goal of a go-to-market strategy is to get a commercial contract. But what happens is that there's a lot of hurdles after that when it comes to if there's a prescribing doctor, or who recommends, what is the triage team aware of your product, all these kind of things. And then we know that there are problems as well with engagement and uptake. So I help companies develop these products that are engaging, so that when a contract is signed, there's actually it ends up in the hands of users and it actually has an impact in the real world. I help companies with their go-to-market and commercial strategy, helping them finding the right customer for their product, but also for their runway and the time and money that they have to do that. And I help with business model and pricing as well. And I help them collect the data that they need, both for regulatory purposes and commercial purposes. And I can help design clinical trials and draft protocols to do that. And specifically, I do a lot of work as well on regulatory and AI, and having a very deep understanding, and having had loads of conversation with the MHRA and the FDA about AI in clinical settings, about what's acceptable for different classes of medical devices and what can be done, but also what kind of endpoint to use in your studies, what kind of control groups, etc. So I work across in the whole world, across the kind of UK, Europe, US, and Middle East. And my ask for the community is to reach out, really, if you want to talk about the market specifically. I'm very keen to understand both where the opportunities are and where the challenges are when it comes to your digital products and AI in clinical science.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Malika. How should people get in touch with you? Do you want to pop your details into the chat, maybe?
Yes, I will do that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Can we have a kind of huge, warm and welcoming round of applause for our 3-minute intros? And if anyone would like to give a 3-minute intro in the future, please do get in touch with us on the organizer's email address. Alicia, back over to you.
Many thanks, Nick. That was a rapid run through of yeah, really lovely to hear from our community, and that's what what we want to make sure that people have the opportunity to do. So now I'm really excited about this next session that we have today. So we're joined by, as I said, Malte, Gerhold, who's the Director of Innovation and Improvement from the Health Foundation, and Nell Thornton, one of the Improvement Fellows as well too. So a very warm welcome to both of you, who have come to hopefully talk to us about no opportunity without a strategy. So the government's AI opportunity action plan and what it could mean for the NHS. So we have this action plan, sets out a roadmap for AI growth across lots of different sectors, including health. But really the question is, maybe is it the right strategy to unlock real opportunities for the NHS? So really interested to hear their thoughts. And if people have questions or comments, feel free to pop them into the chat. We've got some time for a good meaty discussion afterwards as well too. So Nell, am I handing over to you or Malte? Who's going first?
So Malte is going to go first. Just can you see the slides okay?
Yes, excellent.
Perfect. All right, Malte, over to you.
Great, thank you. Well, first of all, Alicia and Nick and all 100 of you for welcoming us to the meeting. That's great. And if it wasn't intimidating enough to talk to over 100 of you, there's also at least 7 different AI scribes in the chat that I've noticed. So we're going to try and do our best to provoke you to a good conversation without trying to match any of your own expertise and clinical experience of AI. So we're going to briefly talk about 3 things. What does the plan say? What could it mean for the NHS? And then our view on what it should mean. And to not quite give the game away, but also give you the TLDR at the very beginning, we think the plan is good, but it's nowhere near enough to actually get the best benefits out of AI for the NHS and healthcare. Right. Now, if you go a couple of slides further on what the plan says. So the plan was commissioned by the current Labour government just after they came into power in July from a man called Matt Clifford. If you haven't come across him, he founded a company called Entrepreneurs First, which is doing lots of work with founders and other talent across the globe. And he was also appointed as the chair of the new Advanced Research and Invention Agency, ARIA, which was set up under the previous government for new cutting edge research. So he is a man out and about and knows a thing or two. And he did this review with the explicit ask to look at the role of AI for the economy and to boost growth, which you will know is a big topic for the current government. And it was published in early January and is called the AI Opportunities Action Plan. It's got 50 recommendations. We're not going to go through all of them here. I hope you're so glad to hear. But he helpfully structures this into three themes. The first one is about laying the foundations for enabling AI, which is all about having the right infrastructure in place, something they call AI growth zones for new data centers. There's a recommendation to set up a national data library in the UK, the opportunity to bring together lots and lots of different data sets and make them available to AI. There's a commitment to increase the compute resources 20-fold over the next few years, and an announcement to start developing a new supercomputer in the UK. Lots of recommendations about building the talent base and skills for AI in the country and to improve regulation as part of that. And the government followed that up very quickly with announcing, a first AI growth zone, as it is called, in Oxfordshire to build new data centers and other investment. The second theme of the review is about changing your lives by embracing AI, which sounds great. And it talks a lot about how the country and public services can drive adoption. They recommend a particular model, which is called Scan, Pilot, and Scale AI, with an attempt to actually get new AI technology much more quickly into the market, and particularly public services. And then thirdly, the theme of securing a future for homegrown AI, which actually centers particularly around one recommendation, which is to set up a new unit in central government called UK Sovereign AI, which has a remit to not just direct investment, but also work with industry, work with public sector, help develop talent, and so on. So become responsible for making the most out of the AI opportunity in the country. And as a result, Matt Clifford was actually appointed to advise the Prime Minister directly on this work. And some of you might have heard that Demis Hassabis, for example, from Google/DeepMind, has also been appointed to advise the government on this. So they've brought the good and the great together about this plan. And before I move on to, sort of what this sort of means for the NHS, I wanted to just give a couple of fun quotations from when this plan was published, because it gives you a flavor of how the current government thinks about the AI when it came out. So first of all, they said, we want to back AI to the hilt so it can lead to more money in the pockets of working people. I mean, you make up your own mind to what extent that the connection between backing AI to the hilt and more money in the pockets of working people is coming together. But growth is a big theme for the government, and they've seen this as one of their top priorities. They also said that today's plan mainlines AI into the veins of this enterprising nation, and it will revolutionize public services, because for too long we have allowed blockers to control the public discourse and get in the way of growth in the sector. If this sounds a little bit like the sort of tone of things that are coming across the pond, the Atlantic, then that's certainly how it feels to me. And they want the country to be a change maker rather than a change taker, and for the UK to become #1 place for AI firms to invest in the future. So that's to give you a flavor of what the plan says. Let's move on next. What it could mean for the NHS. The plan is cross-sector. It's not health specific, but it has listed health and life sciences as one of its priorities to look at. And there's a number of things in there that are very much NHS and health relevant from it. First of all, the idea of a national data library, bringing different data sets together, I think is a great opportunity to explore much more what data sets have the greatest value and potential to be brought together, not just with NHS data, but also wider social determinants of health and understanding, particularly for opportunities to identify risk and early intervention and prevention. The plan, as mentioned, talks about setting up much greater and growing the sort of compute infrastructure in the country. Actually, if that's an opportunity to think particularly about what the needs there might be for the NHS and wider healthcare in building that infrastructure, that's a great opportunity. It talks about having greater AI talent, having a talent pipeline, upskilling the workforce. Again, we know that in the NHS, there's a lot of shortage, particularly around analysts, good AI skill. What's somewhat missing here is probably more emphasis on having also clinical leadership over AI, not just experts in AI itself and analytical skills, but clinicians who can lead on AI and use AI in their day-to-day work. They talk a lot about regulation and the coordination of regulation, including putting more capacity and capability into the existing regulators. So if they make good on that, and there's actually more money available for organizations like MHRA or Care Quality Commission to actually realize what they've been asked to do around AI and the deployment of AI, then that would be a good thing. And it's hard to disagree with the point about scan, pilot, and scale AI for the public sector. We know that in the NHS, particularly scale remains a problem. And if there's more central support to see some of this deployed in the NHS directly, then that's an opportunity. And it would be amiss of me not to mention also that the government, as part of all of this, committed that they would be working with the Alan Turing Institute and other institutions to make all of this a success. So let's move on then. What should it mean for the NHS? And what do we think about all of this? And so between Nell and I, we want to give you 5 reflections of how we think the government and also the NHS leadership should actually think about the AI opportunity and apply that to health to really get the most out of the opportunities of AI for the NHS. So first message or reflections from us is we believe that there needs to be a dedicated AI and healthcare strategy to actually benefit all of the NHS. Now, we know that there's no shortage of activity on AI across the NHS, but right now it's not being brought together in any way that helps to make it more than the sum of its parts. And so for a while, we've been calling for a dedicated strategy in AI to address that, but there's particularly 2 reasons that we wanted to emphasize here for why we think that is the case. The first is that we feel that unless there's a much more systematic approach for how AI is being deployed across all parts of the NHS, we run a really big risk that we create something that one of our colleagues has sort of called an AI aristocracy amongst the NHS, where those organizations who have the right data and the right maturity and the right staff and the right resources will march ahead, and other organizations, hospitals, trusts, sectors will be left behind and cannot catch up. And we've got the same risk when it comes to how AI is being used by those who can afford it, whether that's in terms of income, whether that's in terms of digital skills or other factors versus those who can't. And right now, there is no systematic approach for how we make sure that actually everyone benefits, all parts of the NHS, but also all parts of the population. The second important reason for us why we think there needs to be a systematic approach and so strategy, not just an action plan, is that at the moment, there isn't yet a clear sense of prioritization and understanding of what the actual challenges are that AI could and should ideally solve for the NHS. And if we have an opportunities plan that further strengthens and supports how AI is being brought into the NHS, there's a big risk, not just that we overwhelm organizations with what's on offer and what they should do with that, but there's also a big risk that there's just more and more off-the-shelf solutions that are being pushed into the sector rather than tools that really match what patients and what staff say they can do most with. And sub-point to that, particularly for us, we think there's a lot of opportunity over the next 2-3 years, particularly around non-clinical users of AI, and that there needs to be a really clear prioritization of where we want AI to be deployed, what problems we want it to solve, and then we put our effort, emphasis, and capacity for the NHS behind it. But simply saying AI is great, we're going to build all the infrastructure, we're going to support industry, is not going to do that by itself. And finally, as part of that, there's also a sense that there's a risk that AI will go where the industry can go, which, as all of you know very well, is where the data is, such as imaging. But actually, if we want to really support the NHS and make it sustainable for the future, we particularly need to focus on where the technology, including AI, can make a difference and shifting care into people's home, onto their phones, into the community and out of the current settings. And again, unless we direct that and actively support that direction, it's not necessarily going to happen by itself. So, we've developed a strategy. It's got 6 priorities. We're not going to go through those now. You can look at those at another time, or in the discussion we can come to that. But that's our first point. Moving on to the second one around AI and the opportunities, which is that implementation, we believe, is just as important as developing AI. Now, to some extent, this is not a new challenge around technology at all. Many of you will probably know that to get the most out of a technology is really not just about having the kit in place, but it's investing in the change and supporting the change in ways of working and in cultures, not just the technology. If it sounds obvious to you, I'm sad to say that it's not necessarily a message that automatically and obviously lands with policymakers and politicians, because often change and implementation is boring. New technology, AI, new kit is exciting, and that's often where the money goes, not in actually getting the most out of it. And just to illustrate that, I wanted to give you 3 numbers that give you a bit of a sense of why we think much more focus needs to be on implementation. The first number is 200 million in AI investment in the UK every day since July, which is a number that the government cited actually in January, which is a huge amount. I think it amounts to about 14 billion back to July, something like that. They said it's on average 8.3 million every hour, it was proudly announced. Barely a fraction of that goes actually in the deployment and the change processes and getting the most out of AI and scaling in the NHS compared to the development. And that feels hugely skewed. Second number, applying that a bit more to the NHS, is that when we did a mapping of wider innovation programs, this is not AI specific, but wider innovation programs, only 4 out of 32 in the NHS were actually primarily focused on implementation and spread and scale. The rest was about new innovations and piloting. And again, that is hugely skewed compared to what we actually believe we need in the NHS. And then the final number is this one, that when we did a rapid review of the literature on what technology frees up time for staff, which is great, how much of that literature actually looked at what people do with their time? And it was less than 1%. And what that told us is that there's still a really huge gap in evidence and an evaluation to understand what happens when technology is being deployed and whether we actually get the benefits out of that we want and expect, not just that in the abstract, it frees up time and that's the end of it. No, we want to know what happens with that time and whether it's to the benefit of staff, patients, and the wider system. Great. From this point on, then, I'll hand over to Nell for our next 3 messages. Thank you.
Thanks, Malte. So, yeah, I'm going to pick up the next 3 points. And the first one I want to start with is a relatively familiar story that I'm sure we've all heard number of times by now, which is, yes, AI has great power and it has great promise, but it also comes with significant risk. And of course, we need safeguards and guidance in place in order to do AI well, reduce the risk to patients, and avoid some of those harmful outcomes. But we think that that's not enough. We think that we need to move beyond that, beyond these concepts of just avoiding harm, and instead ask ourselves the question, it's not just about not making things worse. How can we actually make sure that AI actively benefits society? And with that, we would like to introduce this concept of responsibility. And we think that every time we're talking about AI, particularly in healthcare, we need to be thinking about what is responsible AI. And for us, that is AI that works for all people, society, and particularly the planet. So just to follow kind of Malte's example and show you a number. So generating just one single image using generative AI systems can use the same amount of power as fully charging your mobile phone. It's about the same as running your fridge freezer for half an hour. And it's also the equivalent of kind of taking a 500ml bottle of water and pouring that straight out onto the floor. So that there's huge potential side effects that come with the use of AI. And we need to think about, not just how do we reduce the harm, but how do we actively improve things? How do we make sure that AI, and the more we use it, remains compatible with NHS net zero goals? And how do we use them to kind of address some of the major issues and inequalities that we are seeing more broadly? And one way to do that is to make sure that we are bringing people with us, both the public and staff. And a significant part of that then is understanding how people feel about it, understanding what their concerns are, and taking steps to actively address those concerns, because that's really critical if we're going to be trustworthy in how we're using AI systems. So we did some research at the Health Foundation last year. We surveyed over 7,200 members of the public, nearly 1,300 members of NHS staff, to ask them how do they feel about the way that AI is being used in healthcare. And I'm just going to present a small snapshot of some of the findings to you now. So the first thing to say is actually we see quite a receptive environment for AI in healthcare. So one of the questions we asked to everyone was, how supportive, if at all, are you of the NHS using AI for patient care and for administrative purposes? So when we asked the UK public, 54%, over half, support the use of AI for patient care versus a third who don't. And it's even higher in NHS staff. Over 3/4 of NHS staff support the use of AI for patient care. What about admin? Does that make a difference? Yeah, it does a little bit. So slightly higher, 61% of the UK public support the use of AI for admin, and 81% of NHS staff support the use. So we're working on fertile ground. There's kind of promising kind of reception here, and there's something for us to build on. But that's not to say that people don't have their concerns. One of the questions we put to people was, tell us which of these statements you most agree with. I think AI will improve care quality. I don't think AI will change care quality, or I think AI will make care quality worse. And what we found is 1 in 6 people think that AI will actively make the quality of care worse. This is particularly prominent in young people. So the 16 to 24s, it's 1 in 4 of those who think that AI will worsen care quality. Young people are consistently one of the more skeptical groups. So, what are some of the reasons for that? There's some indications of that in our data. One of people's main concerns is AI going to distance them from their health kind of professional. 53% of the public are worried that AI is going to distance them from staff, and 65% of the NHS staff we surveyed are worried that AI is going to distance them from their patients. So some real things there that we need to think about and actively address if we're going to encourage trust. But one of my favorite findings, one of my favorite graphs is this one. So what we wanted to understand is, what difference does it make to have a human in the loop? Does that really impact how much trust there is in the system? So for this question, we took our public sample and we cut them in half. Both halves were given 6 scenarios, so creating letters, recording appointment notes, predicting disease, supporting diagnosis, doing triage or choosing treatment. They were slightly longer in the survey, but we've truncated them here. half were told that the staff were going to check the decision of that system, and the other half were told that staff did not intend to check the decision of the system. So what difference does that make? And what we did here was we kind of worked out a net score. So anything above 0 means that AI is supported in that instance, and anything below 0 means that it isn't. So when we look at decisions checked by staff, you can see here that they're all positive. The administrative purposes, creating letters and recording notes, most supported, perhaps not surprising. We know that AI for admin is more support than AI for patient care. But even AI for diagnosis, deciding when you're seen, choosing treatment, on balance, is supported by the UK public when the decision of that system is going to be checked by staff. So what difference does it make if we're taking that human out of the loop? Now, there's a few things that maybe we'd expect to see. We might expect to see support go up. Maybe people trust AI more than they trust their clinician, and they're more willing to put faith in that. Maybe it doesn't change anything. Maybe we see that come down slightly, and actually we do see a bit of a hit in the support levels for that, or maybe we see it completely flip on its head. So without further ado, I will show you that the answer is, in most cases, when a human does not intend to check the decision of that AI system, public support for the use of AI in that scenario is completely withdrawn. The only use that remained positive was the creation of letters, and even then only just at +2. So people want to know that a human is still checking that system. It's a really significant issue for them when we're thinking about building trust in AI. What about using their data? So one of the questions we said to people was, tell us which of these you most agree with. I would be happy for any of my data to be used to develop AI systems. I'd be happy for some of my data to be used, or I would not be happy for any of my data to be used. So the good news is 75% of the public are happy for you to take at least some of their data to develop AI systems, particularly happy for things like dental eye data, medicines data, treatment decisions. There is a lack of support for sexual health data that is on balance not supported by most people, but on the whole, people are relatively happy. But it's still really important to point out that a quarter of the UK public are at the moment not happy for you to use any of their data to develop AI systems. And that's really significant because what we don't know is who is in that quarter. Chances are it's not going to be a broadly representative group. So we could be missing whole communities of people in that group if they were to opt out. So again, just really emphasizing the importance of understanding people's concerns and addressing them, because if not, there's a chance the systems we're putting in place are going to make things worse. So just to finish on our last point then, and it's something Malte has touched on already, is that when we're using AI in health, it's really important to think about not just what the piece of kit is that we're using and whether it's working, but also who is using it and how are they using it. And we need to really think carefully about the impact on the NHS workforce, their well-being and their time. So again, in our survey, we asked staff to tell us how much they agreed with the statement, "I look forward to using AI as part of my job." And what we found was positive. Over half, 57% of the staff that we asked said that they were looking forward to using it. Is that equally felt across all staff groups? The position of that grey bar probably gives the answer away, but we do see a difference between them. So the most enthusiastic are the medics and dentists, 67% looking forward to using it in their role. And allied health professionals, healthcare scientists, also more than average looking forward to using AI in their role. But who are the groups that are perhaps slightly less enthusiastic about the use of AI? So nurses and midwives, it drops down to 54, admin and clerical 52, and other clinical services, that includes groups like healthcare assistants, 51. So it's really important when you're thinking about the rollout of AI systems that we're taking account of which of the professional groups are going to be involved in that pathway, and consider, are these AI tools impacting different staff groups differently? Have we heard from everyone? Is everyone on board with this? And also then, so one of the other things we need to think about is when we're putting AI systems into clinical practice, are we taking away any of the elements of the role that people find satisfying, that people enjoy, like the quality or the quantity of patient contact? Are we skilling people up by adding AI into that system, or are we skilling them down and taking away critical parts of that role? Do staff have what they need in order to use that system properly? Is this making their lives easier? So just to come back to a point that Malte was making earlier around staff time, so we often hear that we're going to use AI systems because they're going to improve staff time. We again did some research this year, and actually what we found is that it's not necessarily a given that technologies are going to save staff time by deploying them. What we found is that 44% of the studies that we found on electronic health records showed that actually they had a negative or no impact on staff time. So again, really important to consider the impact of that. What we also found was in those studies that found they had a negative or no impact, in over half of cases, staff were required to spend more time than usual on normal routine tasks, or in over half of cases, 52%, they were forced to take on extra tasks that they wouldn't have otherwise taken. So really, really important when we're deploying these systems to get that benefit, to realize that potential, that we're thinking about the impact on the broader pipeline and on staff time. So just to finish then, so AI has great potential, we know that, but to use it well, we need to be thinking about more than just the technology. The plan, the AI Opportunities Action Plan, might go some way to address some of these concerns and help us use AI. But before we start mainlining it into our veins, we need to think about how we're coordinating it. We need to focus not just on what we're using, but where, who is using it, making sure it's implemented well, and making sure that we're using it responsibly. Thanks so much.
That was just fantastic. Thanks ever so much, Malte and Nell. Really, really brilliant overview, both of the action plan and what that might look like for the NHS. It's really helpful. I love the quotes as well too. Like some of those narratives that are in there are otherworldly. Some of those quotes. If people have a question, you're very welcome to pop questions in the chat, or you can pop your hand up. But maybe while people are thinking, if I could start you off with one actually, which is you're talking about reflecting on the action plan and setting out what those challenges are, those kind of user-led challenges in a health system. And you'd popped in there, I think maybe Malte, you'd said in passing about that, how do we better set out those kind of clinical-led challenges where AI might be of some value? And I just wondered on your thoughts on how do we better do that? Because I think there's pockets that happen, but how do we get better into that system? And then the second bit to that is who then acts on them, those challenges? I don't know, Malte or Nell, if who'd like to answer that.
I'll sort of start, and I think there was a question from Harriet in the chat that was aiming at that sort of separate point around, should we leave it to the market and industry to sort of decide what to go, or sort of be more challenge led. So sort of my starting point is that this point is not to say that industry is somehow bad or has bad ideas. They're interesting ideas. Sometimes they're ideas that are, sort of looking for a problem that are to address. It's as much more that if we really want to get the most out of it and we want to have the best possible potential for it to be deployed and scaled and to be used by staff, given what Nell just set out, we sort of know about attitudes and sort of otherwise, then starting with the understanding of what is actually most of a problem or an issue to be solved either by patients or staff is the most important starting point for that. Now, there's limits to that to some extent in terms of where the data is, so we have to acknowledge that and realize that. But even if it comes to things like imaging data, for example, there are solutions that can make an important but quite a niche difference, and there's solutions that work on imaging data that then enable us to completely change the care pathway, because we can take it out of outpatients or GPs and take it into people's homes without naming any sort of particular solutions here. And so actually to pay attention to which of those existing solutions that we can use today can actually help us to shift care pathways and not just make it much better at the one point of care is an important one within this. My sort of other thought in terms of who does this, sort of my answer's in sort of two parts. One is, I continue to be surprised. I should be careful saying this with this audience. I continue to be surprised sometimes to the extent to which, particularly royal colleges and professional bodies, are not yet very actively leading the debate about what the future of the profession should look like and what they want AI to see and do and help, so that the professions get to the point where they want to be, but rather react to what gets thrown into the system from industry, and then sometimes react positively and sometimes react very defensively in that way. And I think there's a huge opportunity for the professions through the colleges and other bodies to step into that space and say, what do we want to see changed, and what technology can actually help us do that and to guide in that in that way. Nell, do you want to add anything to that? Right.
No, I think I absolutely, of course, agree with everything you said. I think just to pick up, I suppose, more of a micro point is just around, there's national priority setting that needs to be done. But equally, as practitioners and people working in frontline services, how often are we sitting down or talking to our patients and asking them, what matters to you? What are your challenges? If I was going to change something for you, what would that be? We're very rarely driven by the desires and the needs of patients themselves. We're quite often being driven by what's available on the market. So just to really encourage people to think about, am I buying this piece of technology or building this piece of technology because people have told me, staff or patients have told me they genuinely need this, and I think that AI is the right solution in this case? Quite often the problems we're trying to address aren't problems that can be addressed with AI. Or am I just doing it because it's convenient, it's here, and I just need to look like I'm buying something that's going to make a difference? So just to challenge ourselves really in that instance and ask ourselves that question.
Lovely. Thanks both. There's another reflection in there, and a comment and a question about how to address that kind of adoption challenge. And some of it speaks to, if you get the right challenge about where you want to set out where AI is a solution, well, then you're kind of feeding back in that loop. But now there's really interesting things from your slides about the staff time narrative, about the patient and the clinician contact and engagement. So how do you think we can get better at understanding what some of those adoption challenges are and then helping to address them?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've largely hit the nail on the head, Alicia, to starting to the point of what the challenge is and getting people on board with it. You know, adoption issues are largely cultural. It's not just kind of buying the thing, it's making sure that people want it, it's working iteratively. But it's also about taking the time to really understand the entire pathway and pipeline and where that technology fits in. It's not enough to buy a piece of kit and kind of ram it into a pipeline and think that that is going to make the difference. We need to take a step back and say, which is the particular element of this pipeline that we're struggling with? Is AI going to improve this? You know, or actually, are we just adding in extra steps? Are we just making it more difficult to do what we're already doing? And that is very much just about talking to staff and understanding the processes and understanding which ones can be improved with AI. But another thing to point out actually is like Malte was saying, you know, what do staff do with that time? We also need to be challenging this assumption that time back from technology is always time for patient care. We did some research last year. We asked several hundred clinicians, if you had 1 hour given back to you by technology, how would you use that time? And only 27% of those said that they would use that for patient care. Now, you know, the other activities are things like reducing overtime, taking a break, doing some training, you know, supervising others, all very, very valuable activities, but somewhat challenge this assumption that time back is time for care. So it's really important when we're looking at this, that we're not just thinking about, you know, ultimately, how can I free up time? But then where is that time going to go? And, you know, how can I get it to go to the right places?
Mm. And Alicia, on this point about, you know, how do you focus on implementation and sort of change? Again, you know, I sometimes joke we all need to start walking around with hats that say make implementation great again, and sort of start a movement. But the sort of the short, I think the sort of the shorter version is I sometimes wonder whether this, you know, the political appeal is to talk about the thing, which is the technology or the AI or the solution, and to help shift that towards the outcome or the capability to achieve, which then puts much greater focus on the challenge of implementation and making the change and realizing the benefits. So, you know, everyone talks about ambient scribes at the moment and the AI opportunities there. I think it'd be a lot more exciting if the starting point of that conversation would be about how can we make clinicians and nurses' jobs easier and give them time back and there is potentially an AI solution that can help, but only if we realize it and implement it in the right way, not just if we buy it and sort of hope for the best.
That's really great. Well, I like that. That quote, "Make implementation great again," will be on mugs and mice mats around.
Yes.
Just like, next slide, please, from COVID times. One other question for me, and then we've got a few announcements of other things coming up, and some fantastic discussions going on in the chat as well too. It's hard to keep up with all of them, but there's a couple of questions in there that are reflecting on biases and inequalities, and it would be remiss of us really if we didn't just touch on that, about how do we ensure that implementation and the development delivers on that social good for all question. What are your thoughts on the most important things in that space?
Yeah, I can go first.
Go now. Yeah.
So yeah, it's always an important question. It's always a question that should be asked. We know there are biases in the data. We know that AI has a tendency to massively exacerbate those. Now, there is a lot of work. There is a lot of awareness of that. There is a lot of work being done. For example, the Standing Together guidelines to talk about how can we create representative data sets. There's an element of inequality that's often not very often addressed, which is the inequalities that happen at the point of implementation. So you can build the most perfect AI, unbiased AI system in the world, but if you're only deploying it in a very small part of the country that's only available to organizations who have the time and capacity to adopt it, you are going to further exacerbate inequalities at a macro level across the system between the systems that can afford to adopt those technologies and those who can't. And that is going to further widen inequalities in both access and outcomes across the country. And that's an inequality that we're not paying enough attention to. And so when we're talking about the need for responsibility and we're talking about the need for a strategy, a really core part of that is thinking about how can we move beyond just encouraging AI adoption in centers of excellence and kind of almost get those centers of excellence to help other parts of the country who haven't been able to do that to also raise their standards so that everyone is moving up and we're not just moving further apart from each other.
I think that last point there from Nell is very important. I think we sometimes talk about particularly sort of inclusion, diversity when it comes to technology more widely, not just AI, is about sort of making sure everyone can access it, or everyone sort of can use it. And we would find it really exciting if the starting point would always be how can this make it better, not just the way it is. How can it improve access for some who don't, or how can it make it easier for some who currently don't find it easy? And maybe that's not always possible, but if we set our sights a bit higher, then we start with a different bar of what we're trying to achieve, not just to codify as things are at the moment, including the inbuilt access and equity issues.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks both. Really great discussion, and thanks ever so much for taking some of those questions and the questions from the chat as well too. We'll draw it to an end, I think, there. For the rest of this week, actually, sorry, some other announcements that are coming up. We've got a busy couple of months. So in next week, we have got, Wednesday, get my weeks muddled up. This week, Wednesday, the 26th, from 5 till 6, is the second Neuro AI webinar, where we've got two speakers from the University of Essex are going to talk about work with their brain-computer interfaces. So that's Reynold Schneider and Sebastian Holder from the University of Essex. So you can find more details about that on our on the Clinical AI site during the other that's Wednesday in April. Our next Clinical AI meeting is on the 29th, and we've got two speakers going to come and talk to us about large language models in Africa and the impact that that's having there within that kind of health space. So that's coming up on the 29th. More details to follow shortly. And then on June the 5th, our Women's AI supergroup is running a hybrid conference. I'll pop the details in the link for you in the chat, focused on bridging research and patient voices, particularly in women's AI. And you're more than welcome to join and sign up to that. And if you're linked into that group, then please do join in that area. And then just lastly, the colleague that we're working with in the Faculty of Public Health, and we've been mapping out kind of knowledge gaps and areas of interest within the public health discipline. They've opened up a new survey focused on interpretability and explainability of AI in healthcare settings, and have a shortened survey. So if we have some clinicians on the line that would be interested in contributing to that, then I've popped that link in there as well for you. So just very lastly to say a huge thank you to Nell and Malte. It's really been a fantastic discussion. I think it'd be wonderful to revisit some of that maybe a year from now and see what has moved in some of that space. Really fascinating and challenging to think about AI from adoption and implementation and how that works, not just in the English NHS system, but across the 4 NHS systems of the UK as well too. So thank you to you both. Thank you to our volunteers for in their introductions as well too. And yeah, have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. We'll leave it there.